When water meant survival, native tribes didn't wait for rain. They engineered solutions that worked anywhere. What they created wasn't just survival, it was innovation far ahead of its time. Long before anyone invented fancy water filtration systems or complicated plumbing, Native Americans had already figured out something brilliant. They turned rocks into water collectors. Not just any rocks, mind you, but massive stone formations on hillsides that worked like giant funnels during rainstorms. Here's how it worked. Rain would hit these sloped rock surfaces and flow downward, gaining speed and volume as it traveled. But here's the clever part. They didn't let all that precious water just run away into the dirt. Instead, they carved out hidden storage pits at the bottom of these natural rock slides. When storms rolled through, gallons of clean rainwater would rush down and fill these secret reservoirs. The engineering was simple but genius. No pumps, no electricity, no maintenance crews, just gravity doing all the heavy lifting while they collected every drop. Then there were the rooftops. Some communities realized their homes could double as water collection systems. They installed basic gutters. Nothing fancy, just carved wood or woven plant materials that guided rainwater from their roofs into containers below. Makes sense, right? These weren't your modern plastic rain barrels either. We're talking about clay jars and hollowed-out logs positioned strategically around homes. Every time it rained, families would rush outside to position their containers perfectly under the roof runoff. The weird part is how efficient this system actually was. A small roof could collect hundreds of gallons during a good storm. But the real test came during dry years. That's when every single drop mattered. Families would cover their containers to prevent evaporation, and kids would learn early never to waste even a sip of that precious roof water. It was literally liquid survival stored in clay pots. What's fascinating is how they maximize collection without any modern tools. They'd angle their roofs just right, create small channels to direct water flow, and even use animal skins as temporary gutters during unexpected downpours. Everything was designed to capture water that would otherwise disappear into the ground. The rock catchment systems were particularly impressive because they could collect water from areas much larger than individual rooftops. A single rock formation might serve an entire community, funneling rainwater from acres of stone surface into shared storage pits. These underground reservoirs stayed cool and fresh, protected from both evaporation and contamination. Well, speaking of underground storage, that's where things get even more interesting. Because once Native Americans mastered collecting rainwater from above ground, they had to figure out how to store it safely below ground for months at a time. The techniques they developed for underground water storage would make modern engineers jealous, and that's exactly what we need to explore next. After collecting all that precious rainwater from roofs and rocks, Native American communities faced their next big challenge. Where do you store gallons of water without losing it to the scorching sun or contamination? The answer lay beneath their feet. Underground pits called tankas, or cisterns, became the backbone of water storage across many tribes. These weren't just holes in the ground, they were engineering marvels disguised as simple dirt pits. The cool earth naturally kept water fresh for months while protecting it from evaporation that could steal away precious drops in mere days. But here's where it gets clever. Bison hides and tightly woven mats line these underground tanks to prevent leaks. Think about the ingenuity here. They turned animal skins into waterproof barriers long before plastic existed. The hides were carefully treated and stretched across the pit walls, creating a natural seal that could hold hundreds of gallons without losing a single drop to seepage. Then, there's the timing strategy that separated successful communities from struggling ones. Smart tribes dug their reservoirs immediately after heavy rains to trap surface runoff before it disappeared into distant valleys. They'd watch the sky, feel the wind, and when storms approached, everyone knew exactly where to direct the flowing water. These temporary lakes filled quickly during downpours and provided backup supplies when regular sources failed. Some communities took underground storage even further by burying clay pots filled with rainwater throughout their territory. These buried vessels slowed evaporation dramatically compared to surface storage. Well, it's basically nature's refrigeration system. The Earth's consistent temperature kept water cool while the clay pots prevented contamination from animals or debris. The real genius shows in how these hidden stores functioned as insurance policies. Whole families could survive summer droughts that lasted months, all thanks to water collected during brief rainy seasons. Children learned early where each storage site was located, creating a mental map of survival resources scattered across their homeland. What's fascinating is how different tribes adapted this underground concept to their specific environments. Desert communities dug deeper cisterns to reach cooler soil layers, while forest dwellers used natural rock formations to create partially underground reservoirs that required less digging effort. The maintenance of these systems required community cooperation too. Families took turns checking for cracks in the hide linings, clearing debris from collection channels, and ensuring storage pits remained covered to prevent contamination. One damaged cistern could mean the difference between thriving and barely surviving during harsh seasons. But even the most sophisticated underground storage meant nothing without proper filtration and purification methods. These communities discovered that certain materials could transform murky, questionable water into something crystal clear and safe to drink. And their solutions were surprisingly effective, using nothing more than everyday plants and natural fabrics. Sometimes the smartest solutions hide in plain sight. Native Americans figured out that regular cloth could become a powerful water collection and filtering system. No fancy equipment needed, just fabric, some basic positioning, and a little patience. Here's how it worked. Large pieces of cloth got stretched between poles or hung from roof edges during rainstorms. Rain would hit the fabric and slowly drip down into containers placed underneath. But wait, there's more to this story than simple collection. The cloth acted like nature's own filter system. Dust, leaves, bird droppings, and other nasty stuff that normally mixed with rainwater got trapped in the fabric fibers. What dripped into the buckets below was cleaner, safer drinking water. Pretty clever for something that looks so basic, right? Different types of cloth produced different results. Tightly woven materials caught more debris but let water through slower. Looser weaves allowed faster collection but didn't filter as thoroughly. Smart tribes experimented with various fabrics to find the perfect balance for their needs. Then there were the rooftop systems. Some villages covered their entire roofs with layers of grass, reeds, or specially prepared cloth materials. Rain would soak through these coverings, getting filtered naturally before flowing into collection areas. The grass and reeds added an extra layer of purification that regular rooftops couldn't provide. Weather patterns made this technique especially valuable. During light rains, every drop that touched the fabric eventually made it to the storage containers. Heavy downpours filled buckets quickly, giving families enough water for days or even weeks. Remote communities loved this method because it required zero maintenance once set up properly. The cloth could stay in position for months, ready to catch the next rainfall. When fabric wore out, it was easy to replace with new materials. And the weird part is how effective these simple filters actually were. Modern testing shows that basic cloth filtration removes a surprising amount of harmful particles from water. Ancient peoples discovered this through trial and error, not scientific instruments. Seasonal adjustments kept the systems working year-round. During dry months, the cloth stayed folded and stored safely. When rainy seasons approached, families would string up their collection fabrics and prepare storage containers. This timing meant they never missed valuable precipitation. Let's not forget the portability factor. Unlike permanent stone cisterns or earthen reservoirs, cloth collection systems could be packed up and moved easily. Nomadic tribes especially appreciated this flexibility when following seasonal migration patterns. The beauty of fabric filtration lay in its simplicity and effectiveness combined. No digging required, no complex construction projects, just smart positioning of everyday materials. These systems provided both quantity and quality improvements over direct rainwater collection methods. But even the best rainwater systems had limitations during extended dry periods. That's when communities needed more reliable water sources, leading them to develop ingenious techniques for finding fresh water near rivers and streams. Rivers were lifelines, but drinking directly from them? That was asking for trouble. Smart communities figured out something clever. They didn't need the river itself, just what leaked from it underground. Here's where it gets interesting. These folks would dig shallow wells maybe 20 or 30 feet from the riverbank, but never right next to it. Why? Because rivers flood, and nobody wants their fresh water source turning into a muddy mess when the waters rise. The trick was finding that sweet spot, close enough to tap into the underground seepage, but high enough to stay safe when nature threw a tantrum? Well, the magic happened below ground. River water naturally seeped through soil and sand, creating underground streams that flowed parallel to the main river. This underground water was like the river's quieter, cleaner cousin. No floating debris, fewer bugs, and definitely no animal droppings washing downstream from who knows where upstream. But here's the genius part. These riverbank wells filled up slowly, really slowly. While river water rushed by carrying mud and whatever else got stirred up, the seepage took its sweet time filtering through layers of earth. Sand acted like nature's coffee filter, trapping the nasty stuff and letting cleaner water trickle down into the well. Then there's the lining situation. These weren't just holes in the ground. Communities would line their wells with woven grass mats or flexible willow branches. Think of it as adding an extra layer of filtration, plus it kept the well walls from caving in during heavy rains. The weird part is how these wells kept producing water long after rivers dried up completely. Summer droughts would turn mighty rivers into cracked mud, but those underground seepage areas, they'd keep trickling for weeks or even months afterward. Underground water moves like a lazy Sunday. It takes forever to show up, but it also takes forever to leave. Some communities got really crafty with placement. They dig multiple shallow pits at different distances from the riverbank, testing which spots gave the cleanest water. Too close and you'd get muddy seepage during storms. Too far and you'd hit nothing but dry dirt. Finding that perfect distance was like hitting the water lottery. Makes sense, right? Instead of dealing with whatever nastiness floated down from upstream communities, they were essentially creating their own private water source that happened to be fed by the river's underground leaks. The best part about Riverbank seepage collection was its reliability during the toughest times. Even when surface water became scarce and communities had to ration every drop, these hidden underground streams provided a steady backup supply that could mean the difference between thriving and barely surviving through harsh seasons. But what happened when rivers weren't available at all? Some communities had to get creative with seasonal flooding patterns. When rivers suddenly turned into raging torrents, most people ran for higher ground. Native Americans, they grabbed their shovels and got to work. Floodwater wasn't a disaster waiting to happen. It was free irrigation delivered right to their doorstep. The trick was catching all that rushing water before it disappeared downstream forever. Smart farming communities built earthen berms along field edges, creating natural speed bumps for flood flows. These weren't massive construction projects either, just strategically placed dirt mounds that said, "Hey water, slow down and stick around for a while." Stone walls worked even better than dirt berms in some areas. Rocks didn't wash away as easily, and they created perfect little pools where floodwater could settle and soak into the soil. The weird part is how simple this engineering actually was. No fancy tools, no complicated measurements, just common sense and a good eye for where water wanted to flow naturally. Then there's terracing, which sounds complicated, but really isn't. Picture cutting steps into a hillside, except each step is designed to catch rainwater and snowmelt. When storms hit, instead of all that precious water racing downhill and taking topsoil with it, the terraces grabbed it and held on tight. Less erosion, more irrigation, and crops that actually had a fighting chance during dry spells. But here's where it gets really clever. Seasonal ponds. These weren't permanent water features that took up valuable farmland year-round. Communities identified the lowest spots in their growing areas and turned them into temporary flood catchers. When spring floods arrived, boom, instant irrigation reservoirs right where crops needed them most. The timing had to be perfect, though. Miss the flood by a few days and you're stuck with dry fields all season. Catch it right, and suddenly you've got enough stored moisture to plant beans, squash, and corn even in areas that barely got enough rainfall normally. Makes sense, right? What's fascinating is how this stored floodwater actually made crops stronger. The slow, steady moisture released from saturated soil beats random rainstorms every time. Plants could establish deeper root systems, and farmers could count on steady growth instead of hoping for the best. Some tribes got so good at flood management that they could predict exactly which fields would produce the best harvests based on spring flood patterns. Bad flood year? They knew which backup spots would still have enough moisture for at least some food production. The whole system worked because it copied what nature already wanted to do anyway. Water flows downhill, settles in low spots, and slowly feeds into surrounding soil. Instead of fighting these natural patterns, smart communities just gave them a little help with strategic barriers and channels. While flood harvesting solved the problem of seasonal water storage, there was still the challenge of making sure all that collected water was actually safe to drink and use. Water tastes terrible when it's full of mud and weird stuff floating around. Our ancestors figured this out pretty fast, and they had a brilliant solution that didn't involve fancy equipment or chemicals. They used plants. Not just any plants, though. Specific ones that could actually clean water naturally. Cattails were like the Swiss Army knife of water purification. These tall, brown, hot dog-looking plants that grow near ponds and marshes, they're incredible at soaking up nasty stuff from water. The roots work like tiny vacuum cleaners, pulling out harmful chemicals and bacteria that could make you sick. Native communities would deliberately plant cattails around their water collection areas, creating natural filtration systems that work 24/7 without any maintenance. But here's where it gets really clever. They didn't stop at cattails. Reeds were another favorite because they grew fast and were tough to kill. These plants have this amazing ability to absorb toxins through their root systems while releasing clean oxygen back into the water. It's like having a living, breathing water treatment plant right in your backyard. Then there's water hyacinth, which sounds fancy, but is basically a floating plant with purple flowers. Some tribes would collect these plants and place them directly in their water storage ponds. The hyacinth would float on the surface, looking pretty while secretly doing the heavy lifting of keeping the water fresh and drinkable. Plus, if times got really tough, parts of these plants were actually edible too. The weird part is how well this actually worked. Plant-filtered water didn't just look cleaner, it tasted better and was genuinely safer to drink. These weren't just random plants thrown into water hoping for the best. Different tribes knew exactly which plants worked best in their specific regions and climate conditions. Growing these natural filters was ridiculously easy compared to other water purification methods. You literally just planted them near your village's water sources and let nature do its thing. No digging elaborate systems, no complex maintenance, no special tools required. The plants would multiply on their own, creating bigger and better filtration systems over time. What made this technique even smarter was its sustainability. While other water collection methods might wear out or need repairs, plant filters actually got better with age. Older, more established root systems were more effective at cleaning water than newly planted ones. These living water purifiers were often grown along village edges, where they served double duty. They cleaned the water and created natural boundaries or windbreaks for communities. Talk about efficient land use. The knowledge of which plants worked best was passed down through generations, with each community developing their own expertise based on local plant species and water conditions. But even the most sophisticated plant filtration systems had their limits when water became extremely contaminated or scarce. That's when our ancestors had to get really creative with their next trick. The sun beats down mercilessly on cracked earth, but Native Americans found a way to turn that blazing heat into their ally. Solar distillation might sound fancy, but it's actually one of the most brilliant water purification tricks ever developed. Here's how they pulled it off. Animal bladders, or thin, translucent skins, were stretched over containers of dirty water. The sun heated everything up, causing water to evaporate and rise as vapor. When that vapor hit the cooler skin above, it condensed back into droplets, clean droplets. These rolled down and collected in separate containers, leaving behind all the nasty stuff like salt, mud, and bacteria. But wait, it gets even more clever. Some tribes dug shallow pits in the ground and filled them with questionable water. They'd cover the pit with a stretched animal skin, weighted down at the edges with rocks. A small stone placed in the center created a gentle slope, directing condensed water to drip into a collection vessel below. Free water purification system, courtesy of Mother Nature. The beauty of this method? No fire needed, no special tools required. Just sun, some animal skin, and patience. Well, maybe a lot of patience since the process wasn't exactly lightning fast. Let's not forget the resourcefulness factor here. These communities were dealing with water that would make modern people cringe. Brackish marsh water, muddy puddles, even slightly salty springs. Solar distillation transformed all of it into drinking water that was actually safe. The sun did the heavy lifting while they went about their daily business. And the weird part is how effective this really was. Even in scorching desert conditions where finding any water seemed impossible, families could produce enough clean water to survive using just the moisture they could scrape together. Some groups became so skilled at this technique that they could set up multiple stills and produce gallons of pure water from the murkiest sources. Then there's the maintenance angle, basically zero. Unlike other water systems that required constant upkeep, solar stills just sat there doing their job day after day. The only real challenge was protecting the animal skins from cracking or developing holes, which would ruin the whole setup. Modern survival experts still use variations of these exact same techniques. The principles haven't changed one bit. Heat source, condensation surface, collection method. Native Americans figured out the perfect formula centuries before anyone understood the science behind it. What made this method especially valuable was its reliability during the worst droughts. When rivers disappeared and wells ran dry, the sun kept shining. As long as they had some water source, no matter how contaminated, they could produce clean drinking water. These ancient solar engineers proved that sometimes the simplest solutions work best, turning the desert's greatest challenge into their most dependable resource.